In this lesson, we'll explain why women's opportunities were limited in the mid-1800s, identify the reform movements that women participated in, and describe the progress of the expanding women's rights movement. So we'll discuss the Seneca Falls Convention. We're going to discuss women's involvement in temperance, and we're also going to discuss women's involvement in the abolitionist movement and in the women's rights movement. The Cult of Domesticity. Women's roles were beginning to change in the early to mid-1800s, but they were still treated as property once they were married. Some women began protesting for equality for women and for slaves. But women were expected to basically only work inside the home. This was called the Cult of Domesticity, domestic meaning home. A woman's key role was to raise the children and to raise them as good citizens. They had some opportunities for women's education, but they could not vote and they had no property rights. Women were housewives. Once they got married, their jobs included cooking and cleaning, raising the children, and making sure there was food for the home. These are the women that are impacted by the Second Great Awakening. Women in the 1830s had more free time than their mothers because they had immigrants that were available to help them with domestic chores. They in turn start to have time to be able to turn their attention to causes like abolition, temperance, and eventually feminism. Sarah and Angelina Grimke were two daughters of Southern slaveholders who became involved in the abolitionist movement, and they became spokesmen for anti-slavery. Angelina actually wrote an appeal to Christian women of the South, urging them to rid the country of slavery. Another reform movement that women got very involved in was the temperance reform movement. Basically, alcoholic beverages that most people drank in the 1800s were beer and whiskey. Reformers blamed alcohol for the breakup of families and for poverty. Men were getting injured or killed working the new machinery of the Industrial Revolution when they had gone to work having had too much to drink. Women are going to be the leaders of the temperance movement. Temperance societies will spring up all over the country, and this movement will be so successful that alcohol consumption rates in the country will drop by almost 50%. You can clearly see this picture here shows the evils of drinking, and this picture here that is used by the temperance movement to show that the women discourage alcohol consumption. Education for women. Until the 1820s, women had very few opportunities for education beyond elementary school. The Grimke sisters did open a school for women. In 1821, Erin Willard opened the Troy Female Seminary as an academic school for women. In 1837, Mary Lyon opened Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts for women. African American women had even more obstacles getting an education. Elizabeth Blackwell, pictured here, became America's first female doctor in 1849. Catherine Beecher undertook a national survey on women's health and found that 3 out of 4 women were actually ill and rarely bathed or exercised. The women's rights movement begins at the Seneca Falls Convention in New York in 1848. It's organized by Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Their purpose was to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women. They wanted to publicize the second-class status of women and begin to fight to remedy it. They wanted to fight for equal rights for women. Over 300 attended, and they passed a series of declarations. The issue of female suffrage or voting was seriously opposed until a speech by Frederick Douglass convinced the delegates to pass a declaration demanding it, and this will be the beginning of the women's demand for the right to vote. Only one convention attendee, a 19-year-old named Charlotte Woodward, would live to see the women win the vote in 1920. The Declaration of Sentiments was the declaration that came out of the convention. It was based on the Declaration of Independence. We're going to read this and look at this more as a class activity together. But what I wanted you to do is read this portion here that I've shown you on the video, and then be ready to think about what you think it means, and we'll discuss it further in class. This is a picture of one of the founders of the convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and we'll discuss this further in our class tomorrow. Although the convention was not 100% successful, it was the very beginnings and laying the groundwork for the women's rights movement.